Hi, everybody. Welcome to our end of the month presentation from Lanteria. I'm Karen Smith, and you'll see my slide here shortly. We're going to give it a minute or two just to see if there's some other folks that are going to join, and then we'll get started. Today we're going to be talking about HR software implementation. We got a fancy word of deconstructed, which means we're going to try to break it down as to what might have to happen if you're going to deploy some type of HR solution. Doesn't necessarily have to be ours, but of course we encourage you to buy ours. But this is more talking about the project itself and trying to make sure that there's a good understanding about how you would approach this type of project. And maybe some of the organizations have never done this before. Maybe you are new to deploying a higher technical solution for tracking your employees, managing your employees. Others, this might be very familiar to you, but maybe necessarily in the HR space. So we'll try to touch on all those. I see there's folks still joining, so we'll just give it another minute or two, and we'll just make sure that we get everybody. When I see that number hold just for a minute, then we'll get started. Okay, I think the number's going to hold. Anybody else is going to join, they're going to have to catch up. So again, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we're talking about HR software implementation pretty much at a higher level today. I'm not going to get down into the details of our Lanteria product specifically. This is again more about understanding what every client probably should bring to the table regardless of the solution, and some of the expectations that they need to set within their organization, as well as what they may be accountable for even when they work with a third-party vendor to deploy a solution. Okay, so let's get started. Well, that's me. And I've been working in IT for a really long time. I've worked in pretty much all areas of IT, and that includes help desk as well as technical design, as well as network design, as well as application development. But in the last 10 years or so, I've really become a business or client advocate, specifically in the HR and talent management space. And that's actually been a very rewarding portion of my career, because I really like to help solving problems for our client and to help them get a good solution in place to kind of ease some of the things that they do day to day that maybe they have inadequate tools or just need some more automation in their lives. I'm going to do a little promo just about our company, just so that you can understand again what our product is and where our company stands in terms of our solution that we provide. This company was founded back in 2006, so we have quite a number of years experience in developing an HRIS application. I've been with the company for the last 4 years and have worked on implementations over a variety of industry spaces. We have about 200,000 plus users around the globe. So I'm based in the North American space, but we definitely cover pretty much every country in the world. Right now we also cover over 250 companies that use our product, and you'll see some of those noted here on a slide here in a minute. Again, we are a leader in developing this HR resource system. We do focus on performance appraisal, learning management, time and attendance, and this solution is, again, very mature in the sense that it has quite a bit of functionality on a platform which we use the Microsoft SharePoint solution, on a platform that isn't necessarily the highest cost platform, which makes it affordable across, again, many industries and size of our clients. So we have clients that may only have 50 employees, but we also have ones that may have 5,000. So it's that flexible, and it can, again, grow with your organization. And that's a really important component for us. We're also a Microsoft Gold partner and a preferred business application in their network. And we work on a variety of releases of SharePoint 2013, 2016, 2019, which is one of the latest ones. And we also integrate with Office 365. So if that's your world, then we're a real good application, again, for managing and administrating to your employees in that environment. As I noted, here's some of our higher profile clients, and we have quite a number across a variety of spaces. Everybody needs a human resources application. This isn't really specialized in that sense, because everybody has human capital and they have employees, and they need to manage and track them within their organization as they either come in or they exit, or they contract in, or they're part-time, or whatever be the experience. We've kind of seen every scenario possible. You also notice that we have a few awards that we've won. Most recently, the Business Innovator Awards and Technology Innovator Awards, again, for our product. And even in the 4 years that I've been here, this product has changed tremendously and for the better. And we also can applaud some of our clients for helping us achieve that innovation. They've asked, and we've responded by taking in a lot of their feedback and changing our product so that, again, it becomes even more powerful than it was prior. So that's the promo. Now let's get into the good stuff. So one of the first things any project needs to define when they first start is the vocabulary. There's often a lot of terms within the client side of the house and within the IT side of the house. And essentially what an HRIS application does is it tries to marry those two things together. But oftentimes both sides of the houses speak different languages. So you want to make sure that you capture a lot of that vocabulary. And today, some of that vocabulary that I'm going to use is, if you hadn't already suspected, I did mention HRIS. That's a Human Resources Information System. And that's oftentimes what the technical side of the house talks about. There is also stakeholders, which are people who have interests, executives, usually the ones signing the checks, that are interested in this application going in and being successful. Because again, you're filling a need, or you've determined that you need to change the system you currently have, again, for improvements within your environment. Product owner is often another term that's used, and that is somebody within the business side of the house, again, who determines some of the requirements. They work with other people in the organization to understand what their needs are, and they're the kind of the practical users of this system when it's all said and done. Though many people have IT who works with the product owners to deliver the solution, IT is ultimately not the final user of the system. So you always want to keep that awareness even from the IT side of the house. And so probably you'll hear me speak from both sides, because as a client advocate, we want to make sure that both sides are heard, and we don't necessarily want to make either one side more important than the other. We just want to make sure that everybody understands. But ultimately, the product owner are the people who are going to, again, they may not administer the system in technology sense, but they definitely are going to be users of the system most frequently. And that's the goal, is to make sure that the system is user-friendly, understood, meets their needs, and again, fulfills all the platform and technology requirements that the company also has laid out. Contributors to the project are folks, anybody who has a piece in this overall implementation. So that could be technology people, that could be trainers, that could be staff, again, that could be business resources, financial folks, anybody that, again, can contribute either by defining a process, building a component of this, all can be identified as contributors. For the IT side of the house, environment, platform, and even methodology from the project perspective, in-house, again, depending on whether IT is running the project or HR is running the project. Those are pretty common terms. Environment, tech goal, environment is usually around the specs and the products that you're using. And platform, again, would be SharePoint and version control of that. Methodology has to do with how are you going to actually deploy this project, and what type of methodology are you going to use. We'll talk a little bit about, there's a slide for that a little later. Software release, so if you're in a development type environment, understanding that we are a development product, and so therefore we do have regular releases, updates, fixes, patches that go out, and we deliver new functionality in our solutions as well. So that's all wrapped up in the terminology of software release. Business process, so this is gaining understanding of how business is done today. And oftentimes we also see clients trying to either replicate something that they do today, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it also, and when a project like this comes around, it's also an opportunity for the business to say, hey, we don't really like the way that worked, or that didn't work, or it doesn't work. And so we would like to potentially identify it and make some changes to it. And we'll talk about that as well. Artifacts and templates, again, these are deliverables. They're tangible objects, usually in a document form, and they contain, again, information, historical or otherwise, of either how it is or how you want it to be. That could be a form, that could be a spreadsheet, that could be a procedure, that could be a diagram, it could be pretty much anything that you bring to the table. And then the last two terms here are as is and to be, and these kind of delve in a little bit deeper to the methodology side of the house. But the biggest key when building a new HRIS system or deploying a new HRIS system is how is your world today and how do you want your world to look? And bridging that gap often is probably the biggest chore or effort that can come in a project, and making that transition, making sure everybody understands that that's what you're trying to do is, again, can be one of the bigger efforts anytime you're doing an implementation project. So those are some of the key terms. You'll probably hear me use them interchangeably throughout our presentation today. So you just got your project approved. Now what do you do? And oftentimes, again, that can be kind of a scary point if you just got assigned the project as the project manager, or even if you're the client and it got approved and you're like, yeah, I got it approved. I don't even know where to start. And again, this goes back to what do you do first? And collecting that history or looking at how things are done today becomes really critical. Essentially, when you're looking at an as-is effort, you're collecting documentation of the existing environment in the company that you have today. Now, that could mean you do everything on a spreadsheet, in a Word doc, on a piece of paper, in a file cabinet. Maybe you collect Xerox copies of things like driver's license and diplomas, any kind of license, professional license, and you stick it all in a folder and then you stick it inside a file cabinet. If that's the process, then that's what it is. But you still have to identify, how do you do these things? What happens when a new person walks in the door? What happens before that person walks in the door? Where do they go? Who do they see? Who needs to be told? Who needs to prepare? And some of these are pretty obvious questions. You can grab the low-hanging fruit and quickly say, okay, IT needs to set up a desk. Maybe not so much in coronavirus time, but in the old days, set up a desk, set up a computer, issue them a phone, We'll go back in the day, a pager, if they don't get a phone or some kind of device, potentially. Maybe they get that, maybe they don't, just depends on where they are in the organization and the need for it. But you may have a desk phone that you still have to set up for them. They need a telephone number. They're going to need a network ID. They're going to need access to certain drives. You know, they're going to need certain software. So, you know, again, somebody has to define all of like that technology side. Now on the HR side, you have to get key employment documents. As I noted before, maybe you want a birth certificate, maybe you want a professional license, maybe you want a graduate degree, maybe you want gosh, let's see, I'm trying to think of some other things. Additional accounting documentation. And you go through that side of the house. There's orientation, there's videos to watch. You know, there's sign off to be had. There's, again, quite a number of processes. And I think if HR usually sits down and starts to think about all the things that they do, this is a great, again, a great starting point that even if they just make a checklist to say, here's all the things that have to happen, that gives them a sense of, again, how they can apply that to the new system. And if it isn't captured or there is no process for it today, but there should be, and it all falls on one person in the organization that everybody knows is this one person, and she or he is the go-to person for this particular process, you have to think, what if that person isn't there tomorrow? And can I automate some of that, or can I automate it more so that person isn't so burdened? Oftentimes, again, there's, you know, key people in the organization. Things are born from the growth of the company itself, and those people remain. They hang on to certain processes, and people just kind of say, well, it's working, we're going to leave it that way. But again, here's an opportunity for you to document that and see if there is a way to improve it. Is there more exposure that can be made? What they're doing, you know, can it be better protected? Is the data safe? Or again, is it all paper sitting in a file cabinet somewhere or on somebody's desk? It's even better. So some of the things that you, again, can record here is who's the ownership, who has ownership of these processes, who's the leadership that oversees these. They're not always necessarily within the HR space. Finance sometimes has a role to play in here, obviously IT as well. What are those processes? If you can identify what those are, it doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to be sketched out. So if you can put in Excel or in Word or somehow just to say this is point A to point Z of the process, then that's going to help everybody in the organization understand how it's done today and how, if it either needs to carry forward, you'll have it. If not, you want to redesign it. Again, that awareness is a good thing to have. Technical platform, any integrations. A lot of times when we start projects, we'll be working along and all of a sudden somebody will say, hey, by the way, every third month we do this import from some Access database, and everybody's like scratching their head going, why and how and, you know, what does it do and that kind of thing. But oftentimes those things are overlooked. So you also want to capture that information, and again, any existing documentation that you have. Now this effort and to collect as is, and in the next slide you'll see the effort to create to be is a lot and can be a lot. And a lot of times people don't have time for it, or they're just so overwhelmed they don't want to do it. But ultimately, I would suggest that you do spend some time understanding what the level of effort would be to translate, even if you just picked up what you had today and turned it into a new system, what's that level of effort going to be? And also you want to identify, is there anything that you can leave behind? You don't necessarily have to bring everything over. Either you can use new functionality, or again, maybe you just don't want to replicate what's happening over there. Times change, maybe you just don't need to do that, or there's such a one-off that you can figure out a different process than the long, complicated one that may be supporting it today. But without documenting it and without collecting that information, you'd never know about it. So again, that's the key, is you don't want anything to come and kind of bite you in the backside later on. And that's the key behind as is. So once you get all of the as is information together, your next bet is to do the 2B. So now we're going to set the target of where we want to be. Where do we want to go with our new system? We've got funding, we've got a technology, and what is it that we need to now prepare in order to marry those things to the as-is environment. So this one is, how do you want it to be configured and how do you want it to function in this new state? Again, you're still doing some of the same things. Is the same ownership for these processes correct? Is the leadership that oversees or funds the same? Processes, do those need to change? Do they need to be streamlined? Take out some of the tasks. Are the tasks too defined to specific people and they need to be pulled up so that there are alternates who can actually assist or help with that information? One of the more recent projects I had was, originally it was a very distributed model, the way they did some of their processes in-house, and they wanted to pull that back in to have it a more centralized HR. And that's a change. That's an environmental change to how things are done. And you have to consider that is, again, part of where do you want to go. Education for the people who are no longer going to do maybe what they did prior and they're going to do something different. And for the folks that are now going to take on some of that burden, you have to make sure that they have some understanding as well. Always a big key here is data. And the data tables and the migration of any of the historical data that you have is very, very key. This just cannot be stressed enough, in the sense that if you didn't have good data, or you don't have good data in your as-is environment or setup, it's not going to be very pretty when you bring it over to the 2B in world. And I chuckle only because I know that this, again, is one of those areas where people struggle, and I think they, again, just don't realize maybe how messy the data is in its current state and the level of effort it takes to clean it up. It is not a fun exercise by any means, but often a very necessary one, because without it, you will eventually be doing it. Even if you go live with a new system, you'll still be finding issues, and you'll still find that you have to clean the data. So very important that the data records are good, very important that the data that you bring over is sound, and that it's qualified before it's put into the new system. Otherwise, we spend a lot of time, again, going back, cleaning things up. And oftentimes I've had clients where they've had to just remove all of the data, start over many times in order to just continue to get as clean a data as they can. I know that it's a very tough effort. A lot of times when people are operational with other financial systems, maybe you have ADP or some other ERP or payroll system, getting data out of that system is not necessarily always easy. The way the data was presented or built in that system could be very specific and doesn't necessarily map over very well to an HR system. But again, part of that exercise of the as-is effort before you get to 2B is to identify and make sure you have a good understanding of the data, what the data is, where the data comes from, and again, who's managing that information is going to be part of the process for the 2B environment. Technical platform integration, still looking at it for the 2B. Does anything change? New integrations, different integrations, bringing over less information, more information, automating any of that. Maybe somebody used to have to push a button to do integrations. If you want to now automate that, identify what that is. And also any of the existing documentation you want to still have as part of this, and create some new if you need to, but just don't want to carry it over to have that information. I also can recommend that potentially some of this could be done before you even select a product, and it might even behoove people who, before they ask for funding, to have a good sense of what, again, the level of effort is. A lot of times, and I've worked for many companies that don't do it that way. They usually request, justify that they need a new system, ask for a certain budget based upon what they believe, whatever level of product might fulfill what they need, or somebody defines, here's your budget, you got to find something that works with it. So again, it all just depends on how your company operates, but it is recommended that you still try to take a shot at the as-is and the to-be so that everybody understands what it is that you're trying to accomplish, where you're coming from, and where you're going to. So the pre-planning stage of any project, that's after you get through those first two exercises, is really isolating these fine details between these two states, as is and to be, and it's known usually as the gap or some kind of gap. And the gap can be compared to those original requirements that the business used to justify the purchase of the system in the first place and to support acquiring that new solution. You're going to add and subtract as necessary. So again, this becomes an interesting exercise with your business side of the house, either if the business is doing it or the IT side of the house is doing it with the business. Oftentimes they're asked to compromise. One of the best ways to present it, however, is in a strategy that often works well in many of our implementations, is that we do try to encourage our clients to target a base system. Starting with a base system gives you the opportunity to learn the system, understand how the system works, and adapt to the change. Oftentimes what happens is everybody wants everything all at once and even more some, and it can be quite overwhelming to drink from the fire hose, essentially. There obviously are things that have to be carried over. There's core processes, core integrations that have to be there for that startup, but it's an opportunity to have that discussion and say, well, can this wait? Could this come in a next release? And that ultimately is how you proceed in the future with your application. You don't just implement it once and walk away. It is a living, breathing kind of thing in your environment, and you'll always want some additions, changes, modifications, additions. And you work on a release schedule after you've gone live to say, okay, I went live, I've used the system for a while, and now I have a few changes that I want to make. Maybe a label, maybe a process, maybe an integration, but you can start to plan for those in future releases. Those future releases can again be organized, defined, and funded based upon what it is that you want to do. And just like us as a development company, where we do something very similar, we look at either fixes, patches, and new functionality as we work and improve our product. We pick and choose through, again, development sprint to figure out what it is that we're going to release, what amount of work can we do in the period of time that we have, and what's going to bring us pretty much the biggest bang for the buck, meaning if we have fixes that we have to do because of functionality not quite working as expected, we've got to take care of those. Maybe we have patches because of SharePoint or something's changed some of their functionality, so we need to fix how our application interacts with that. Again, higher priority. And then comes new functionality. What can we offer our clients in this period of time that will make the system better for them, give them functionality they've been asking for, functionality that we feel will grow our own solution. So with that in mind, that's how we work for a development application. Keep that in mind as well for your own HRIS implementation. And that strategy seems to work quite well in that no one ever feels really slighted. Maybe they will a little bit in the beginning if they know that they're not going to get it right out of the gate. But again, with the presentation of the fact that you can bring it up in the next release, and that release can follow very quickly after you've gone live with the main application. But again, if they understand that it's going to be a continuing, living, breathing solution within the environment, usually then most of the clients are usually take more care when they're selecting their choices. They understand that they too need to think about what's going to give them the biggest bang for their buck and what's going to be something they can't necessarily live without. And they all get to have that conversation and talk about it and make that decision. And ultimately that consensus is what makes for a happy and healthy application in the environment. So we've thought about the as is, the to be, we've done some of the pre-planning, and now we're going to start to get into the project initiation and prepping for that deployment. So we're going to staff up. You need to go and find as many people as the organization will allow you to have. But oftentimes, again, these can be quite ancillary players. That one person that sits over there and does some of the processes that maybe nobody ever really pays much attention to. They're just there, they're doing their thing, and that's great. But now for this project, maybe they've, come to the top to be something that's very, very important in those processes that that person has been working on. If you slight them or don't include them as part of, again, your history collection and or your initiation here, that could be to your detriment because you might miss something, and you don't want to do that again. You don't want to have to come back later and say, whoops, I missed this big piece, and now we got to scramble and figure out how we're going to get that still ready for deployment. So staffing up means stakeholders. So these can be the business process owners, they can be your leadership, they can be the actual employees themselves that are going to be using this system on a daily basis, be that the HR team or be that, again, staff employees. Everybody could potentially have some component where if they're going to be a user of this system, they're going to possibly have some contribution. So again, for employees, a user experience is very important, and it's quite key for them to understand and enjoy using the system. Nobody usually spends their lives going and hanging out in an HR system when you're an employee, but that one day that you need to get to a link that allows you to enroll for a learning course because somebody finally gave you the approval to go and do it, or you have the time, you want to make sure that that experience is easy and practical, and they didn't have to do a lot of heavy lifting, and they don't necessarily have to revisit training videos in order to be able to use that system. So again, from their experience and user experience, you want to make sure that you're not trying to make it too complicated. And then contributors, as I mentioned, that person that's sitting over there maybe doing a lot of different processes for you, they're definitely a contributor. Technical team is definitely a contributor. They're going to let you know what they can do on the platform, what can be set up, how things are set up. And they're going to be your go-to people when you want to, again, make any kind of technical platform configuration. And then obviously third-party vendors, if you do incorporate that, the use of them, they could vary as well. That could be a third-party person, meaning whoever you bought the solution with still may work with other vendors to provide components of their solutions, just like we do. We work with ADP. We have an integration that comes out of the box of our solution to work with them if you're an ADP user. We just recently did an integration with ZipRecruiter for our recruiting module. So if you have an account with them, we work with LinkedIn Learning for our learning modules. So again, we try to provide a lot of connectivity between our product and other vendors, and some of those components, again, they become part of the contributors, how things were set up, how you define things, again, like in ZipRecruiter, how you set up your job postings there, and then how they get fed to our external applicant tracking and into our module. So all those pieces, everybody, again, you have to account for everybody. And again, a simple chart, simple list of identifying who all these people are. It's a good exercise to make sure, again, nobody's forgotten. There's always somebody who comes to the table and says, hey, you know about that one person over in accounting? Yeah, well, they have a big piece to play, for approvals. And oftentimes, not everybody's aware of that one person. So it's a good thing to do. The next piece is the guidebook, and I use this, you can eventually call it a playbook when it's actually live, but the guidebook is determining how this project is going to happen within your environment. So for all the project managers who are listening, this is really, this area is kind of the specialty for them. It is all about methodology, bringing together teams, looking at the schedule, tracking the costs, making sure, again, when any of these and they will arise. Interesting questions come up where people may say, I want that feature, I don't want that feature, I've changed my mind, I want more functional, I want less, I want this, I want that. It is all about this particular role as project manager for managing the guidebook. Now, I've always thought, especially as I've gotten later in my career, that a project manager is, if you had to visually draw us as an object, it would be a revolving door. The key here is that things come in and then things go around and come back out. So that means I get the task, I go around inside the door, and I find the person who can either help me solve that problem or build some component or educate people on something, and when I come back out to the person who was the original requester, I have that all nice and packaged up with a response. Or I come back with more questions and I go through the door again. And that typically is really, I feel, how my role happens pretty much every day on all of my projects. And that is what clients should hope, that that person is always looking out and always willing to go get that information, process, configuration, object, whatever's needed in order to keep the project moving along its path. So when I talk about methodology, we all know that the old school is waterfall, newer schools are agile or scrum. Just kind of depends. You can actually mix methodologies in the middle of your project. Just again, depends on the components. You might do some standard waterfall for components that are just configured straight out of the box. They're deployed as part of the initial setup, and then you're just doing small modifications to that. And then there also might be a component of custom development, which maybe you run that as a more agile, where you're doing rapid development and you're always giving back feedback to the client so that they can determine it's good, bad, so they don't have to wait till it's all built and then, you know, say, no, this isn't what I wanted, or it's not working quite the way I wanted it to. So again, the goal is always to try to make sure that everybody has consensus along the path, and just depending on the methodology you choose will determine, again, how frequently that occurs. Teams. So identifying teams, people who need to work on teams. There's tech teams, there's business teams, there's QA teams, project team, again, all sorts of folks, but teams are important, again, to have identified. So one, there's plenty of contacts. If one or more people from the team is not available, that you always have somebody who potentially you can go to for reference, but also for people to work together. Schedule, pretty straightforward. What's the timeline that you're looking at for this deployment after you've put all of the components together in a project plan? You try to look at what that schedule is. And we also all know that oftentimes, no matter what the project plan says, after you put everything in, somebody always wants it done probably 2 months before then. So, and then that always, as a project manager, makes us cringe just a tad, but that schedule is what it is. And if you're trying to meet, say, before the end of a fiscal year, that's just the reality. But then that's when you have that opportunity to go back to your teams and say, hey, we're given 2 less months to do this project, so something may have to give. So let's talk about, again, what's on the table and what potentially might be able to move off into a release. Or do we feel like, again, we can shorten up the initial times that we're given, you know, to complete some of the objects. And that's being, again, a good project manager who isn't afraid to talk about schedule. It's not good to hide behind the schedule and kind of just hope for the best, because usually that's not what usually happens. There's always some roadblock, some stone, as my grandmother used to say, that falls in the road and blocks your path temporarily until you can get around it. Costs work very similar here too. Things can start to add up if you need additional customizations. maybe something else for a platform, some license you didn't expect. Again, that's part of that as is to 2B exercise. You want to make sure that you count for any licensing that you have in place before you start, and then maybe what you need going forward. One that gets a lot of people, I would say, in our implementations is when they put in the learning module. We have a SCORM player, and that is for e-learnings, and it allows you to play any kind of e-learning that you may purchase from a third-party vendor, and it ultimately, when the employee finishes watching it, it sends back data to our learning module to say that it was completed and did they pass or fail. That is separate cost, and oftentimes it's not thought of in terms of the player itself until the very last minute. It doesn't take us much long to implement it, and again, but it is just a cost, and you want to always make sure that there aren't any real surprises, and we need to make sure that when you start those certain modules, no matter the product, is that you understand if there's any additional costs there. And then communications plan. So how do you plan to talk to your team? Is it meetings? Is it emails? Is it a SharePoint collaboration site? And of course, if you are a SharePoint site or a SharePoint user environment, then you definitely can leverage that product to keep track of your effort. You can keep documents there. You can keep meeting minutes there, schedules, artifacts, again, team contact names, all that good stuff. And that document repository also kind of goes hand in hand with that. But you should come up with a strategy, again, for communications. It's important that either you meet on a weekly basis just to touch base, make sure things are going along, look at the tasks that are due that week or upcoming, and focus down into maybe, again, a little smaller of a scope. When people look at a project plan from point to point, it can be quite overwhelming depending on the size and number of tasks. And I think that if you, again, reduce some of the focus and you just look at what's upcoming, then oftentimes people are able to manage and can stay on track a little bit better. All right. So now we're going to start it. Let's start. We've got everything in place that we believe. We've done the prep, we've done the history, we've done the future, we've got our teams together, we understand how we're going to communicate, we've done the methodology, and we're ready to just, I call it, build your sandwich. This is kind of taken from a long time ago. I learned how to use Adobe Photoshop. And the first couple of tries, if you know that product, it's used by photographers and design folks. And it's a fairly complex product. And when I first attempted it a couple of times on my own, it just didn't resonate with me. Until I had a friend say to me that essentially what you're doing is you're building a sandwich. There are layers to it. And just like in your implementation project, there are going to be layers to your project. There's going to be things that have to happen before other things. So you got to put down a bun before you can start putting down the lettuce, meat, and anything else that you want to put on there. And so that made sense to me. It was like, okay, I have pieces, and ultimately when I'm done, I'm going to have a complete sandwich when I've finished. And I know this might sound a little funny, but I felt like this was a good analogy again, that oftentimes what can look quite insurmountable can actually be broken down into manageable pieces. And that can also be a tool that the project manager can use to help. Again, not everybody's a project manager, not everybody's IT, not everybody's technical. And oftentimes you're working with folks that just aren't or don't have that skill set. They have different skill sets and they have different focuses on their daily business lives. And so trying to, again, make that analogy and that communication for them to understand what we're going through makes everybody's world a little bit better. So the things that you have to create or build for this effort should be identified, and oftentimes it's called a work breakdown structure. Essentially, it's a nice task list. And again, you do not have to make this fancy. It can be in Word, it could be in Excel, it can be in Project if you want it to be. But again, all you're trying to do is show everybody, here's all the things that have to happen. Now, you can get super granular, but it probably isn't necessary. You want to just say, here I'm creating this thing. I'm responsible for this thing. And that may have several items that are associated with it, but ultimately it all has to be done to deliver a larger subset. And so work breakdown structure helps you define that and helps you identify all the things that have to be created and done. The next piece is you're going to do the work assignments. So people have to know who's doing what. And you don't necessarily want to assign somebody who's never done something ever to a task, but it does happen. So again, can't assume that everybody will only work on things that they know about. But those assignments become very critical. They become the responsible parties for these objects, and those people need to focus again on their delivery schedule of those items. They also need to be very realistic when they say, I'm going to create something, build something, configure something. If they've never done it before, oftentimes people feel pressured to, I guess, shorten up the time that it takes. And a good project manager can also have a sense that they may be undercutting their estimate, so you can help them make sure that they, again, have enough time. The worst thing you can have happen is everybody undercuts their time, everybody feels like they can get it done a month earlier, and then suddenly you're coming closer to that time frame and you're seeing you're not even halfway done. That's going to be a problem. So again, it's not like it doesn't happen in the environment. A lot of times things change or things just happen, but again, you have to account for anything and everything that possibly can happen. And oftentimes that's one of the things, is making those work assignments and making sure those estimates are good. And then also you want to define any relationships, or we call them dependencies, and Microsoft Project calls them that, predecessors that have to happen before other things. Again, if you're going to snap your piece into somebody else and that piece isn't there, you don't want to be sitting there waiting, for that component to be finished. Again, it's not like it doesn't happen, but it's a consideration, and you have to think closely about what can be delivered, what can run at the same time as other things. Not everything has to wait on, a predecessor or item or task above it in the list. And then ultimately, you're just going to start work. People are going to have tasks. They're going to start. You're going to get things done. You're going to use your communications plan to keep up with those items and make sure those components are built, configured, developed, designed, whatever needs to happen. And also, again, the people who are responsible need to come to you if there's questions, roadblocks, issues prior to waiting to the end. So again, open dialogue is going to be really key here in any project. And as I noted, like I said, weekly check-ins for status is a good place to start. Oftentimes you can parse that down to smaller audiences. If you have a large project team, you can meet with business side, you can meet with tech side, you can meet with the development staff, whatever is going to be easiest and, again, less confusing for everyone. And also the distribution of maybe here's the weekly status of the tasks that are upcoming or going to be delivered for this week is a great way for everybody to be on the same page and not have to wade through a longer task list to understand what's happening. So as you start to build things, or you can wait till the end, it's kind of, again, somewhat how a company works, and depends on how the solution and the methodology you selected, but you can have testing occurring throughout the components. So again, if you have one track of your project that has a customization or a development customization, you can do unit testing for the developers, can do that, then systems testing as well. And then ultimately you can also do user acceptance testing. If you want the clients, the product owners, to be able to see the component before it comes off kind of the assembly line, give you any feedback, go back, make any changes, and come back out for testing again. But testing becomes really important. Testers have to understand how the application works. They need to understand how the application was designed, in the sense they don't want to have them think about how something should work, or how they actually interpret the application. They should be kind of a very neutral, very Switzerland type contributor here to the project, in that here I was given test cases. I'm following the test cases. Did they pass? Did they not pass? That kind of scenario. Again, we don't necessarily want them to go off the path. Oftentimes they can be found going off the path. Not that that's necessarily, again, a bad thing, but it can spend too much time doing it, where you're trying to solve or rectify a situation that in typical practical use would not occur. The person wouldn't have that access to do something that they're trying, or it's from a different user perspective, or again, that the way it gets passed down in the process, it just wouldn't be that way. Now, they may have been able to find it, trick the system, or do something into it to make it not credible, but again, you don't necessarily want to spend your time chasing, I guess, essentially, items that really aren't of value in terms of testing responses. So test cases become really important, making sure the testers understand, again, what's the functionality, who are the roles of the system. So like in our system, we have different user roles that have different permissions within the system. We have HR, we have managers, we have employees at base levels. Each one of those can do more things. If, however, you're an employee that has HR permissions, that means you by default have the highest level of permissions. And when you use the system in that HR role, or even in your employee role, oftentimes you'll see icons, you'll be able to do things that the typical employee wouldn't do. So the other key piece here for user acceptance is to make sure that you test from all of those perspectives. You can't have a tester who just has HR access and says suddenly, well, I can see this. And it's like, well, the employee wouldn't see that, but they saw it. So therefore it becomes a defect or an error on their report, and ultimately that's a kind of a stop for you. You have to go back, research it, figure out what they were trying to do and what was going on. So key piece there, again, make sure all perspectives are handled during the testing, and that would include, again, people who are operating the system, administrators, all the way down to the user experience for the employees themselves. And you want to make it through all of these stages of testing before you sign off and say, we're ready to go. So now we're going to move into the next phase. Now, build can take a long period of time. Usually it's one of the longest periods of time, though it varies. Pre-design or pre-planning can also be another phase that where you do that as is to be, and I've mentioned that potentially could be lengthy. But project delivery is the next place that we're going to go, assuming that all of build has gone well, all the components were delivered, everything's been tested, everything is satisfactory by the product owner, by the technical owners, and potentially you've also shown this to leadership, either along the path multiple times or at the delivery of it after it's all finalized. So delivery has to do with, actually now we're going to hand this system off. We're going to train the administrators. We're going to expose users to user training if that's what needs to be. That can involve videos, documentation, lunch and learn sessions, you name it. Any kind of training is possible here, and you shouldn't limit yourself in terms of how to handle the change management. Again, depending on how large the organization is, you may have to do more change management. Essentially, all that means is, hey, we're moving from this and now we're going to that, and some of these processes might change, and here's how you use the tool, and here's how you're now going to, I don't know, request approval to take a learning course or go to a conference, or this is how you're going to now record an absence from the office, or this is how we're going to now do our performance reviews. So any of those functions that you now are offering based on the new technology, you're going to have to make sure that there's education behind it when you're delivering the system. You can also include documentation, so FAQ sheets, so questions that pop up, people you think are going to ask, you can make those into an FAQ sheet. You can also have it where there's like, did you know kind of information, emails that can go out that follow the delivery of the project, that just say, hey, if you haven't tried this functionality, you know, give this a go. If you're looking for this and you want a quicker way to find out how many sick days you have left, or if you're trying to isolate in the learning catalog courses specific to a job role, you know, this is again how you would do some of those things. So you certainly can highlight that. Our online help system for our application is a great resource, and you easily could leverage something like that if any of the products you chose had something where you could just have links and share those out. Say, hey, you want to learn how to do this? Here's the link, follow this and read. And again, user guides and videos depending, again, your budget and resources and what essentially you want to do or make available. And then let's deliver it. So the release plan needs to think, and I'm fairly old school again, because I come from the dark ages of IT, I think, but way back in the day, we used to have to put together, which was called a standard operating procedure. And I remember one of the organizations I worked for, there was shelves and shelves and shelves of white binders that had documentation of every application that we had in the company. And thankfully that's moved on so that we now have pretty much that in, say, SharePoint libraries or some more automated fashion. Confluence is a great place to store things like that. But the contents still need to be there. And the standard operating procedures were, how does this application work? What environment does it live in? Who has access to it? What's the audience for it? All these details around the point of the project and the effort itself. And that just allows the company to have that as a great reference, and also ultimately as a place to start if 5 years later you decide to change the tool or upgrade the tool. You already have your as-is environment already documented. So think about it that way, that when you're building out 2B, that ultimately it becomes your new as-is for the future. Other things to think about is data protection. You know, is your data backed up on a regular basis? Is there a disaster recovery plan for it? Larger organizations have to think about, if there is a disaster, what level restoration is the HR system. So more considerations, probably a little bit more on the technical side of the house here, but still things that are good to have for any implementation. And I wouldn't hold it only to just HR systems in this case. This is good for any kind of technology that you're deploying to your environment. And then that communication plan and making the announcements, having leadership do that. You know, again, what are you going to share with the employees? Is it a larger announcement? Is it a soft push? So it's just something nice that you just announce, but there's not a lot of heavy effort behind it. It's going to be a slower transition as you move people away. We often find that when our clients are leveraging our time and attendance module, that that could be a big change for people on how they register absences and or timesheets if they're used to different methods. So sometimes there's a little bit of a slower start to converting over to the new product, but ultimately you want to keep encouraging employees to do so and make sure that they're comfortable doing so. Hey, so now we're live. The application's out there, we're in production. So what should we do now? The key goals here are that you're going to review your experience. A lot of times people call it a post-mortem. And this gives you an opportunity to look at what went well in the project, maybe what you could have done better. You know, did you leverage the technology like document repository as well as you could have? Was that cumbersome, too difficult for people? Did they like the smaller work lists? Did they do okay with a larger project plan? All those kinds of pieces that we've just gone through, you know, what was appreciated and what could still be improved for the next effort. You also now immediately turn around and get to identify items for future enhancement releases, just as you may have promised that client way back in the beginning when you asked them to make some choices about what could not go maybe in the first iteration of the product. Here's their opportunity now to kind of slice and dice that list that they had, and maybe as they start to see them use the system more regularly, they can change their priorities. Maybe something that they thought that they would like to bring out earlier, maybe now they can forego and they can see there's something else that's more important. And again, this becomes a more repetitive experience. You can have one release, two releases. You can potentially have new releases every 3 months is usually a good schedule to start with. Maybe it'll take a little bit longer if it's more customized stuff, but ultimately that's a great place to start. And then also while you're in production, while you're trying to move forward to even more functionality, you also have to look at how's it working in the state it's in. And typically a month or so after, you may still be in what we call a triage state. You're working regularly through help desk tickets, questions, issues, items that have come up and either were overlooked, need to be reconfigured, need to be fixed, or you need more education around them. Any of those, again, that triage method where you bring maybe just select folks from the project team back together to try to solve the issues that you have at hand. And because maybe somebody's uncovered something that, you know, again, needs attention, needs every participation. And that makes a big difference. If you can bring those people together, then that way you're able to work through the problem, determine, again, the severity of the problem and see how quickly you can make changes to it. Without it, oftentimes smaller sets of troubleshooters may spin their wheels for a while without it. So that triage method is a good effort. And that is pretty much all that I would have to share today. I'm going to look and see if there's any questions. Maybe not. I don't think I see any right now. But if you do have any more questions, you're welcome to share them. You can email me. I think my contact information is here on the next page. So if you have any questions to me or go to our site at lanteria.com. You can certainly sign up for other webinars, see other resources that we have out there, technical tear sheets on our products, and hopefully this link will also be made available. So if people didn't get to attend or get to attend all of it, we'll make the link available out on our website so that you can listen to it again. Right? Hopefully everybody has a really good day. Appreciate your time. See you soon.